had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome back, or welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by PhysioCrem and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you an array of episodes ranging from featured performer episodes through to interest editions, expert editions, and coaches' corner editions. And on today's episode 171, I'll bring you a conversation that I recently had with Meigh, physiotherapist known as the Kettlebell Physiotherapist, PhD scholar on all things kettlebell training. That's right, if you have ever eyeballed a kettlebell at your local training facility and perhaps like me have been intimidated by how to use them, well, today's episode is going to shed a lot of insight regarding the best use of kettlebell training and the many benefits of their use. Meigh describes himself as a 40-something English-born Aussie, husband and father of two. Neil graduated as a mature-age student in 2012 from Bond University on the Gold Coast with a Bachelor of Exercise Science and a Doctor of Physiotherapy. Neil was first introduced to Kettlebell Hardstyle Training towards the end of 2012, where he then went on to complete the RKC Instructor Training Course. Neil himself has been strength training since 1991, is a certified personal trainer, and has been using kettlebells exclusively for more than 6 years in his work as a physiotherapist and now a researcher. Neil's professional focus is on healthcare, not sick care, and Neil believes in the maxim that prevention is better than cure. Neil is due to complete his PhD at Bond University in early 2021, with the project being titled Investigating the Effects of Pragmatic Hardstyle Kettlebell Training on the Measures of Health-Related Physical Fitness and Psychosocial Wellbeing in Sedentary Older Athletes. Neil describes a kettlebell as being no better than anything else, but they're small, portable, inexpensive, relatively easy to learn, and really fun to use once you know how. Neil likens the kettlebell to the Swiss Army knife of exercise options. So let's jump in, or should I say, let's swing on by with kettlebell physio Meigh on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show. This is a real treat. I've been looking forward to hosting today's guest, Meigh, for quite some time. Neil and I have had years of friendship and also professional collegiateship in the physiotherapy space. And in recent times, Neil, as you'll hear today, has really forged a following and a keen interest in all things kettlebells. So, Neil, you are known as the Kettlebell Physio. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thanks, Brad.
Neil, we always like to start with this with an expert edition. What's one thing you're learning at the moment?
This is probably going to sound really boring to most people, but I'm in neck deep in research at the moment. So the one thing's probably going through the process of getting ethics approvals. It's been a bit of a pain, but that's probably the thing that I'm focusing on right now, as of this week.
Is that ethics so that you can sling kettlebells off subjects and
something like that? And to be given the green light to go ahead, I need to be given a thumbs up from the institution, which is university, to get people involved with a clinical trial. So yeah.
So you're learning all about ethics. It doesn't sound that interesting, but
it's not.
It's part of the process. Yeah. And in terms of your research, Neil, and your world, can you put listeners of the show in context with your current world, what it looks like?
Absolutely. So day to day, I spend 5 days a week full time at Bond Uni. So I'm approaching halfway through my PhD. I started January last year, 2018. So that's my full-time focus. I'm on a scholarship there, so it's a full-time role studying and researching this area of kettlebells in clinical practice.
And what is that? I mean, you're also a dad of two beautiful young children, husband to Ashley, who also works in healthcare as a general physician. What does a day-to-day, week-to-week, look like for you? Are you head down in 236 research papers, or?
Yes. So my wife works full-time, so we split the responsibility with Aston and Rosie. So I'm dropping them off at school and kindy in the morning and then picking them up at the end of the day. So that shortens my study day a little bit, 3 days a week. But outside of study, I spend a lot of time with my face in research and trying to learn more, and not just about kettlebells. Actually, very little to do with kettlebells really. It's more physiotherapy is the profession. That's my background and my interest. This happens to be the little bit that I'm focusing on for the time being. So yeah, a large and the majority of my spare time outside of being at uni is focused on learning and keeping up to date. That's my passion, is learning and the process of becoming better and more educated in the area that I'm focusing on.
It's one of the things, having known you for so many years, I've always respected about you is your ability to retain details and plumb deep on subjects. And let's plumb deep today on the subject of this thing called the kettlebell, which I'm assuming for most listeners, everyone's seen one, touched one, maybe tried to throw one around like we see on YouTube or social media. But Neil, let's just do a little bit of a kettlebell 101. In some of the work you're working on there at the moment, this kettlebell scoping review, which has a staggering, how many references here? 66 references. There's this great statement where it says that in Russia, a kettlebell is seen as a source of pride. So where did these things originate from, and how did they find their way into gyms all around the world in the 20th century?
There's a long history there. The kettlebell is associated with Russia or Eastern Europe. It's been around since the 1700s. It hasn't really become popular until the late 40s. In 1948, kettlebell sport in Russia was officially recognised, and as of last year, the 2018 World Championship, there were over 500 competitors from 32 countries competing in kettlebell sport. So that's a very distinct area of kettlebell practice. The other side of it, which is my background, is what we call hardstyle kettlebell training. So Valery Fedorenko, a Russian guy that emigrated over to the US, was the guy responsible for making Girovoy sport or kettlebell sport popular in Western society. And around about the same time, so late 90s, Pavel Tsatsouline had also moved over to the US, and he was the guy that's been credited with making hardstyle kettlebell training popular. So he published something in a strength and conditioning journal in 1998, and then he set up the Russian kettlebell certification, or Russian kettlebell challenge as other people call it, the RKC, and that started in 2001. So hardstyle as we know it now has really been influenced by Pavel. Anybody that is involved with kettlebells or has spent enough time looking around will be familiar with his name, and that's the training program that I went through. I've just turned 44 this week, and I've been training in gyms since I was 16, but I don't recall ever seeing a kettlebell prior to 2008. And I actively avoided them like the plague. I was old school barbells. That was my training philosophy and practice, and I avoided them. I didn't know what to do with them. Relatively, the weights were light compared to what I was doing, and I just didn't understand how or why they would be used. There was nobody in the gym using them in a way that impressed me, so I just didn't touch them. How I got involved was through the functional movement system, or the FMS. I had gone down to Melbourne to do a course. I was in a group of maybe 50 predominantly guys, predominantly personal trainers that were familiar with kettlebells. The FMS use kettlebells within their corrective exercise framework. Gray Cook, who's the founder of that, has been through the RKC system as an instructor, knew Pavel very closely. So the corrective exercises and the use of kettlebells was very much influenced by hardstyle. So I was introduced to the FMS, and as a byproduct of that, the kettlebells. And you've probably seen somebody that's got on a bench and tried to do a dumbbell bench press for the first time, and they're wobbling all over the place, very unstable. And I was exactly like that with a kettlebell. I can still remember it now like it was yesterday, doing an arm bar and feeling like a fish out of water, but seeing all of these people around me that were proficient and doing these exercises that I knew nothing about, and I thought I want to know more. And in the context of the FMS, there was quote unquote clinical value and utility to using these exercises. So it was at that point, which is the end of 2012, that I made this decision that I was going to learn more. So that's I guess my background into it, and where the hard style influence has come from. So I trained for 8 months, went through the RKC Instructor Course, which I passed in 2013. Actually failed the test the first time round, and then had to resubmit videos because it's very stringent on the criteria to get this certificate to say that you're competent.
Was that assessing your ability to do that? Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So one of the things that people hear about is this thing called a Snatch Test. So you have to swing the kettlebell overhead at a particular weight. So for me, with my body weight, it was a 24 kilo kettlebell, swing it overhead 100 times in 5 minutes. It's tough. So the certification course not only teaches you how to perform the exercise, but you have to have reached a certain standard of competency to be able to pass this performance benchmark, for them to say, yeah, we're comfortable that you've put in the miles and done the work, so to speak.
And that's the RKC accreditation. Yep.
Yeah, the RKC's gone a little bit quiet, so Pavel moved away from that company that he set up, and he set up another one called Strong First, or the SFG, and that's become a lot more popular. So people that are looking around for courses, that's the most recognised and the largest. They run training courses internationally here in Brisbane not that long ago. So the SFG is a mirror image of the RKC, but they're both influenced by the same person and the same training system and philosophy.
And Neil, you mentioned that you didn't use the word, but that's the spirit of, I think, what you were describing is that you're a bit intimidated by the kettlebell, and certainly intimidated by other people, executing the exercises with the kettlebell. And I can relate to that. We had you recently come in and educate some of our team here at the Pogo Physio around how to use them and potentially incorporate them in the work that we do with rehabilitation. Yep. And I don't think anyone was not intimidated. It's kind of like, well, yeah, we know the way around the kettlebell, but we've seen the swing, and we've seen the CrossFit games and the bells used there. And it was a really great confidence boost to walk out of that feeling like we've got some fundamentals in place. So can you speak to the bell itself? Like, let's just do a little bit of anatomy of the kettlebell.
Yep.
It's often black, not always. Sits in the corner.
Yep. So the fundamental, in terms of naming parts, you've got the handle, obviously. The horns are the bits that connect the handle to the bell, and the bell is the body of the kettlebell itself. They're the only bits that you really need to know. The window is the bit that you put your stick your fingers through to hold the handle. I think anatomy-wise, from the bell, it's of less importance. And the kettlebell as a tool has become so popular now that they vary in size and shape and design and materials. So periodically we'll see them for sale in Aldi, and they're plastic, and they look different to the competition bells, which are all a standardised dimension, and they'll look different to the more traditional bells as well, which are made from iron and vary in size with increasing weight.
So there's competition, there's traditional, and there's Aldi.
Cheap and cheerful. Yeah.
But it's interesting, that you use the word is popular. What do you think's popularised the kettlebell? Is it the kettlebell physio?
No, it's definitely not me. The reason I say that is that I found this passion for the kettlebell and training with the kettlebell. I literally moved from 20 odd years of training old school barbell and left it behind, and since the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, I've done literally nothing but kettlebell training and bodyweight training ever since. So I jumped camps completely. And off the back of that and this interest, I thought, this is an amazing tool. I can see the clinical value in it, and I'm going to use it in a business. And in 2015, I opened up my own physiotherapy practice here on the Gold Coast, and the philosophy, the business design, all revolved around using a kettlebell. We would have group classes, and it would be using the kettlebell the same way that a lot of physio practices, there might be Pilates and reformers and mat classes. If somebody came into our practice, it was kettlebells. That was the tool of choice. And that business was closed in 2017, and a lot of that was that we just couldn't generate enough interest, even in the group classes that were focused on people that didn't necessarily have any medical or health conditions. People aren't that interested in kettlebells. So when I say popular, it's popular within a particular niche. The kettlebell sport, they've just had a world championship over in Ireland the last couple of weeks, and the Australian team that went over there. So Australia has a team of competitive kettlebell athletes that have gone over and won gold medals. And I would imagine that nobody knows they even exist. So popular is definitely relative, and we do see them more and more in big commercial gyms, but you don't see a lot of people using them in gyms.
Definitely not. And I mean, after you put myself and the team here through our paces for half a day, a period of time ago, you said that we would feel globally, our whole bodies would feel it, and that's exactly what I felt. And after that, I was convicted. I thought, I need to, you use the phrase jump camp, where you went from, you called it the old school way of strength and conditioning to pure kettlebell work. But, I've still got some attachments with different ways of getting around in a gym. And I thought, but I do want to incorporate some of what I've just learnt in the 2 times a week I get to the gym to do the stuff I like to do. And I've done that moderately well. But even I've found, after spending that time with a healthcare background, I can still walk in there and go, oh, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? Yeah. So can we shift now to some of the key movements and exercises that people can incorporate with a kettlebell? Yep. I've heard you reference the big 6. Yep. What can people do with a kettlebell? And then we'll talk about why it matters. Yeah,
so I guess for this, I'll focus on the hardstyle A, because that's my background. So the main 6 exercises within a hardstyle framework are the swing, a clean, a press, a squat, a snatch, and a Turkish Getup. And once people understand how to do those or perform those exercises, and they get comfortable with a kettlebell and comfortable handling a kettlebell, then you can explore different exercises. But they're the fundamentals, and the philosophy of hardstyle training is keeping things simple. They'll incorporate push-ups and tactical pull-ups on a bar, but the fundamentals of getting good at a swing, a clean, a press, a squat, and a snatch. And when I say squat, I mean a goblet squat. It covers most of the things that people need to get better at in terms of the way that they move, improving muscular strength and muscular endurance, all those factors of health-related physical fitness, as we refer to them in academia. And it's not about adding variety for the sake of keeping people entertained. It's about progress. So if you can perform X number of swings at a particular weight, it's about doing 1 more swing or 2 more swings or going up a heavier bell, and having people feel motivated by progress. And that's one of the things that we used to do at the practice. So we had people coming in, and every week we would encourage them to try and beat a PB. So we'd say, pick something, and we maintained this spreadsheet of I think it was a dozen different exercises and people's PBs, and all they had to do was do one more rep. So every week, regardless, somebody would come in, they would get engaged in a group class, they were performing a huge volume of exercise in a 45-minute session, but they would somewhere along the line rack up a new PB for the week. So they always felt like they were progressing, and all of the classes were A, never the same, but B, they were based on the fundamentals, whether it was a sumo squat or a snatch or a press or a get up. It was those fundamentals.
And that's such a powerful principle in any health, exercise, performance endeavour, being motivated by progress. So what a great way of challenging them and engaging, I guess, their development. Neil, I heard you speak to us at the event you hosted around a couple of quotes that just sort of jump out off the back of what you just shared. And one was, make the main thing the main thing. And the other was, don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. And that really was hit home for me. It was like, okay, this doesn't have to be intimidating. Just work on the basics and get the basics right. And forget the fancy stuff you see sometimes on social media. So can you speak a little bit to those principles and then take us through these big six, what they look like, how they should feel, and a few of the mechanical? That first quote would come from Chris McClellan, or Professor Chris McClellan, who used to be at Bond, strength and conditioning coach. And that really echoes the principles of hardstyle training, which is keep things simple, use the basics and just get better at the basics. I don't know where the second quote came from, but that's personally resonated with me for a long time. Don't practice till you get it right, practice till you can't get it wrong. And the one technique of those six that really stands out for me is the Turkish Getup. There's a lot of chatter on the Turkish Getup, and there's this concept of there's no one best way to do something. And the Getup's a perfect example of that. The goal from a hardstyle perspective is to be able to lift a heavier weight. A Turkish Getup, people look at it and go, how's that functional? But with a physiotherapy hat on, I liken that to, it's just a series of transfers. If somebody's fallen over, let's say it's an elderly person, they've fallen over, it's a safety issue that they need to be able to get back up independently. And if we break that down, they're either let's say they're laying on their back for convenience sake, they're transitioning from a lying position to seated, from a seated position to kneeling, and from kneeling to standing up. So clinically, you could take that one exercise in practice and just teach somebody, let's say they're elderly and frail, how to get up from the floor. As a physio, I always used to feel this sense of alarm when somebody couldn't do what was absolutely basic: sit down on a chair, stand back up again, to use a toilet. If they can't get down on the ground and get themselves back up again, that for me was a big deal. So I would take that Turkish Getup pattern and teach them how to do that in a very set way, given the constraints of their anatomy, physiology, and what they may be working with. But from a Turkish Getup and training perspective, it's how can I lift the most amount of weight, and then how do I biomechanically align my body parts to enable me to do that. So if I can lift 40 kilos, it doesn't matter how you get up with 8, because you've got the capacity to get up with 32, 36, 38. So with 8 kilos is easy. So the principle is do it as frequently as you can in a particular way with a light weight or with any weight, so that when you are lifting 40 kilos, you're not having to think about where your knee is going. Because and I've joked with my wife about this when I've been training at home under the house with a ridiculously heavy weight. 100% of your focus needs to be on that bell, because the weak link in that pattern, that exercise, is shoulder stability. And if you're holding that bell overhead, it's right over your head. And if you drop it, it's going straight down. So you need, if you're lifting heavy, you need to be comfortable and competent that you've built up to that level, but you need to have the capacity to, if you're going to drop it, be able to
get it safely one way or the other. And if you're pushing a PB with the heaviest weight, all of your focus and mental focus needs to be on that bell, not on where your body parts are. So the quote there of practice until you can't get it wrong just enables you to get better at doing the heavy end of the spectrum, so that you're not having to think about your hand and your knee and your foot. It just happens automatically. If that makes sense.
That's great. Do people, I mean, not everyone will want to push themselves to discover PBs ongoing with the kettlebells. So, but those principles, I guess, still carry through just to good technique. And I think that might be one of the safety aspect. It's probably one of the intimidating factors. It doesn't look safe. Like when you see it swung around, it's like that thing's moving around. But can you speak to the safety concerns people might have? And have there been any tragic accidents from kettlebells going wrong?
No. So from a safety point of view, I often, because I follow people that are interested in kettlebells, and I'll often see people refer to potential harm specifically around the low back. People are bending forwards or flexing their trunk forwards and upright and repeating that and doing it with a heavy weight, and people think that's potentially harmful. At this point, there's zero evidence that suggests that it is potentially harmful to any body part. There have only been 3 published records of somebody having, quote unquote, hurt themselves, but they're not really of clinical relevance, if that makes sense. 2 of them specific, all 3 could have been attributed to just a training load error. One was a de Quervain's tenosynovitis in the thumb, so one of the thumb tendons. One was a radial stress fracture where it was a competitive sport athlete and she had gone up a weight. And that's just one of those unfortunate instances. If you push too hard, too fast, something might give. And then the other one was a lady that had competed in an hour-long kettlebell training session, I think as a complete novice, and ended up with exertional rhabdomyolysis. So she just pushed herself too hard. So none of those really you can attribute to or associate with what I or anybody else might be doing in a gym. So in terms of risk, there's not really any evidence that kettlebell training, if it's done appropriately and in a particular way, is likely to cause you any harm. Dropping it on your feet is an obvious issue. Hardstyle people will often train barefoot, but I've never heard of anybody dropping it on their feet, to be honest. Even if you're doing a squat or a deadlift with it, your feet are wider than the bell is anyway. So if you're going to drop it, it's going to avoid your feet. If you're holding something overhead, where people will get caught out is if you're going to drop it, it comes down really quick. So you've got to get out of the way of it and get it safely down to the ground as best you can. But it's like anything. If you've trained, you learned how to do something and you've increased your physical capacity, that doesn't really become an issue because you've got the skill to be able to know when something's going to fail and you have the capacity to manage that.
You're listening to the Kettlebell Physio, Meigh, sharing on all things kettlebell training and their many benefits to health and performance. Support for today's show comes from PhysioCreme. PhysioCreme is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCreme does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates. It's a non-greasy formula. It doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. PhysioCreme can be found Australia-wide at your local Coles, chemist or health store, as well as via their online store. PhysioCreme have generously offered a 20% discount to listeners of the Physical Performance Show. Simply use the coupon code POGO, P-O-G-O, when you shop at physiocreme.com.au to redeem this special offer. Hurting sucks and PhysioCreme have got your back. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to complete their rehabilitation, get back to their physical best, and in doing so cross the physio finish line. Our philosophy is that we do not want to see you for a single session more than what you require or a single session less. We just want to ensure that you get back to your physical best. To schedule your 1 hour initial comprehensive appointment, jump over to pogophysio.com.au. For now, let's jump back with PhD, scholar, kettlebell physio, Neil Meigh on all things kettlebell resistance training. So Neil, getting practical with the kettlebell, there's the big 6, the swing, the clean, the military press, the squat, the snatch, and the get up. We'll link up videos for each of these with demonstrations from yourself. But Neil, let's work through them. The swing, what is it, and what are the key things we need to know about executing a swing?
Sure. It is done slightly differently, so I'll speak to hardstyle. The deadlift pattern of movement, so if somebody imagines standing upright, bending down to pick up a bar, the movement of their hips and knees and trunk, that's the start position of the kettlebell swing. And ideally you reach between your legs in that position and the middle of your forearms is resting on the top of your thighs. So that's the back position. I stand upright as if I'm pushing the floor away and lock out my knees and my hips, and that should create an arc or a swing of the arms and the bell coming upright roughly to chest height and then back down again. So I let we talk about a float, which is the bell coming up and my arms coming up after I stood upright, a drop where the bell starts to drop down, and then when the bell's roughly level with hip height, I then start to chase it back through my legs, and then the cycle repeats. So it should feel like it's a hip-based exercise, well, that's the intent. My trunk is stiff to transfer force from my arms, which are along for the ride. It's like that Newton's cradle on a desk. So my arms are just acting like a pendulum. It shouldn't feel like a lift. So in terms of novices, that's the one thing that people typically do, quote unquote, wrong, is that they lift it. It's a really unusual, unnatural movement to perform, and intuitively people will lift it. They'll use their back to stand up and they'll use their arms to get the bell up
to swing. So be aware of those things, and you teach around the cadence of a well performed swing. And from memory, it might have been 40.
Yeah, give or take. It's actually quite hard to go much higher than 40. You have to be actively throwing the bell down between your legs. So 40 is probably a target. People tend to swing a little bit slower than that. But in the research that I've been doing in the lab, I don't think it really matters all that much, to be honest. It might change the mechanics of it, the forces that you're putting through the floor, but practically or clinically it really doesn't matter. So an ideal based on the standard would be 40, give or take.
And I remember getting that cadence at the workshop, and it was quick.
Yeah,
it's like, wow, it's metronomic. I found it actually quite, despite the exertion, it's almost like trance-like, relaxing, and you feel like your body's under full load, like you're being thrust into the earth. It's quite a nice feeling. Well,
the principles from a hardstyle perspective is that it's intended to develop power endurance. That's the phrase that they use, and as Joseph Coyne mentioned, power is all based on time and speed. So that's where that comes from. The faster you go, the more power that you're generating. I don't have any data at the moment for that, but I should have coming up very, very soon. I've got lots of force data, and that's been really interesting. So if you take body weight out of it and the weight of the bell, I've got data where there's 100 kilos difference between the amount of force that people are generating with an 8 kilo bell just to perform a swing, which is huge. I don't have any power data yet, but that's where that link with cadence comes from, is this theory of power endurance.
Yeah, interesting. Neil, that's number one, the swing, the clean.
Yep.
What does it look like? What should it feel like? Mistakes, key tips?
People need to be able to do a swing well before they can do a clean. So a clean is getting the kettlebell up into a rack, what's called a rack position. So holding the bell with it resting on my forearm and my forearm resting against my chest. So it's taking the bell from the back of the swing, where I'm standing up, my hips have gone backwards, my arm is between my leg, and I stand upright, and instead of the bell and my arm tracing an arc in front of me. They talk about taming the arc. So as the bell comes through between my legs, I use my arm to steer the weight vertically. So I use that momentum to get the bell upright into the rack position. So that's the clean.
The rack being the kettlebell resting on your forearm.
Yes.
Which we'll link up with the video.
Forearm and upper arm. Yep.
I think I recall your cue being like doing a zipper up.
Exactly, yep. And it's actually really hard to do. A lot of people struggle with that one as well from a technique point of perspective. But yes, one of the cues that I use is to imagine that they're doing a zipper up with their thumb so that their hand stays close to their trunk. Lots of people, if you record them on a video, you'll see that their elbows at 90 degrees, like they're doing a bicep curl, and the bell's way over here. So it needs to be close.
Before you gave me some cues, I was feeling it flop back down on my arm.
Yeah.
Whereas once you cued me up properly, I found it wasn't having that impact. It was more of a smoother taming of the arc.
If you're doing the swing well, it'll generate enough momentum, and you use that momentum to steer the bell into place rather than lift it into place.
Steer the bell into place rather than lift it. So we've done the swing. We're doing the big 6 here: the swing, the clean, the military press, number 3.
Yeah, so the military press is actually quite hard to describe in audio format. So you're taking the bell from a rack position to pressing it overhead. So the arm tends to go forward rather than out to the side. So if I was doing a dumbbell press, I'd be holding the dumbbells here and going through straight abduction, adduction, whereas this one goes forwards and my hand kind of unwinds or spirals up. Then my elbow comes forward and the bell is resting on my forearm as I lower it back down into the rack position. So it's from there up to next to the ear, and then the elbow comes forward and I lower it down rather than my elbow being directly under my hand and the handle of a dumbbell.
Military press. Squats, number 4 of the big 6.
So this is a goblet squat. There's 2 ways of doing this, and this depends on the bell as well. So if you've got a traditional bell, the horns are angled like this. They're not vertical. So when you hold it, it's comfortable and rests on the palms or heels of your hand. Whereas if you've got a competition bell, it's quite awkward because your wrists are adducted this way. So if you're not holding onto the horns, you can flip the bell upright and hold it like a goblet. So that's where the name comes from. So you're standing vertically and then you squat down as far as you can and then back up again. So that's the goblet squat. Question that I often get asked with goblet squats is the trunk orientation. That will very much depend on the mobility of the joints, predominantly somebody's ankle. The goblet squat's actually quite a good tool to help people perform a lower squat because the weight's on the front. So it acts as a counterbalance to keep the trunk more upright. So ideally, if somebody's got an ideal range of motion in the hips and knees and ankles, they're going to go down and their trunk's going to be pretty much upright. But a lot of people struggle with mobility and they won't be able to achieve that irrespective of the weight that they're holding. But there's an ideal and there's a reality.
It's okay not to be ideal as long as you're doing the movement.
Yeah.
Number 5, Neil, the snatch.
The snatch is a difficult exercise to do. I don't do Olympic lifting with a barbell, never have done. I wouldn't try and teach somebody how to do that. But the snatch is a complex exercise as far as I understand it. The kettlebell snatch is the same. So we take the bell through its swing arc, and the idea is that rather than let the bell swing forward so that in an upright position my arms are outstretched and the bell's in front of me, I use my shoulder girdle, my arm, to pull the bell back toward me at roughly head height. And as the bell's coming back, I punch my hand underneath it and then push straight up in the air. And then from that position, I let the bell drop down. So the bell comes over my hand, it drops down really close to my body, and with timing and practice, catch it and then swing it back down between my legs and repeat. The Giravoy Sport snatch is different. Some people look at them side by side and can't see the difference, but there are distinct differences in the way that they're done, because the objective of being able to do that for 10 minutes non-stop with a heavy weight and only change hands once is about efficiency and strength endurance rather than power endurance. So it's a really hard, aggressive, powerful movement. Swing it, and then direct it overhead, drop it down, catch it, repeat.
And then number 6 of the big 6, the hardstyle kettlebell big 6, the get up, which you referenced before as in your phrase was a series of transfers, which clinicians and health practitioners recognise what a transfer is, but basically just moving your body from one position to the next, sitting to standing, etc. So anything to add on the get up, which people refer to as the Turkish Getup?
I don't think there's anything extra that I can add. It's just that series of transfers, but you're holding the weight overhead. That's one of the ones that, well, with all of these, I think it's really important to get some tips. If you're learning how to do a handstand, there will be small things that make a big difference, and it's the same with the kettlebell training. So if you can follow a video on YouTube or follow somebody that knows what they're doing, they'll be able to give you tips that will make a massive difference and make life easier. I was actually talking to Ollie before this. A really good assistance with the get up is to practice it with your back very close to a wall, because the biggest mistake that people make with the get up is the position of the knee underneath. So that transition from sitting to kneeling and then from kneeling to standing, if your knee and your foot are in the wrong position, it just makes it awkward and potentially uncomfortable. And if it's either of those, the weight that you can lift is going to be limited.
And does it matter, Neil, if people don't do or try all of these the big 6? If they just do a selection of 1 or 2, or don't like the look of that snatch thing, so I'll just stick with the swing?
Anything's better than nothing. So even if somebody just did a swing or a goblet squat, they'll get benefit out of it. It's like anything. The more you do, the greater the potential benefits, but they don't need to do all of them. Some people won't be able to. So, for example, if somebody's got limited shoulder range and they, for whatever reason, physically cannot get their arm comfortably overhead, they're not going to be able to do the snatch, they won't be able to do the press, and the Turkish Getup is going to be potentially limited to staying on the floor and doing the first few stages of it. So you just got to work with what you've got.
So if we have someone listening in that's intrigued by the kettlebells, they really want to step into that new way of learning and do something to challenge themselves and recognising the benefits of that, what would be your advice to even get started? They may not have a coach or a health practitioner they're working with.
That's where I was. There was, back in 2012-13, there was nobody on the Gold Coast that had been through the RKC. I don't think at that point the SFG had even been to Australia. So I had to learn off watching videos of Pavel and other people. I think the difficulty is finding people that have a certain level of skill in the area that you want, whether it's kettlebell sport or hardstyle, and learning from them. It's not actually that hard, the difference between simple and easy. It's simple to do these exercises, but it's not necessarily easy to learn them. Some people pick them up a lot easier than others. Those that have a movement background, whether it's Pilates, dancing, and they just have that self-awareness of their body in space, will tend to pick these things up quicker. A lot of people are at the other end of the spectrum and find it challenging. So you can copy and you can do well and you can learn a lot of these basics from videos on the internet. There's so much out there now, particularly instructional videos. There's a guy called Jeff Sokol who's been through the RKC, and some of his instructional videos on Instagram are amazing. That's all you really need.
Okay, so be resourceful and follow someone like Jeff. Sure. You mentioned yourself. You post up regularly with some good videos. And shifting over to why this matters, and this is part of your passion and time you devote into looking at the benefits for health and well-being of using the kettlebell as a tool. But in a scoping review that you're working on, soon to be published, I'm just going to read a paragraph from here. In elite sport, there is a constant need to increase strength, power and endurance, and the kettlebell has become a part of that effort. Kettlebells have been used in strength and conditioning research and injury prevention programs for mixed martial arts, handball, shot put, sprinting and soccer. In clinical practice, kettlebells have been included in programs for lower limb amputees, metabolic syndrome in women, early treatment of breast cancer, for osteoporosis and fall and fracture prevention, home-based physiotherapy with older adults showing signs of frailty and following hip fractures, for healthcare workers, and in programs for improving health-related physical fitness. So I think it's important to point out this is not just for the CrossFit Games athletes.
Yep.
This can have implications really across anyone in society. I have a real passion for bone health and what people can be doing to try and augment and improve that across their lifespan. And certainly I was intrigued after spending time with you doing the work on how beneficial this could be for people's bone health. So can you speak to what you know, what we know, the world knows from research about the use of kettlebells, and then what you're trying to further?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. You mentioned the bone health. I know you've interviewed Professor Belinda Beck and the Liftmore trial. And fundamentally, so much of what we are learning now is really very basic. It's about loading and progressive loading. And that's all this is you're applying load to a body part and using that piece of equipment. I don't see any reason why an elderly person can't carry a kettlebell. I often used to say in the practice when people came in and maybe they were intimidated by the bells, it's just a weight with a handle, but so's a handbag or a shopping bag. And you can challenge yourself as much as you want, or as far as you're prepared to push yourself in a carry. So just physically picking up a kettlebell, walking with it, or holding it in a rack position or holding it overhead is a real physical challenge. You can do that with one or two bells, and then you can explore different exercises. You can focus very much on things like the gluteal tendinopathy exercises. Whether it's a single leg, I can do swings and translate sideways, so I can move myself sideways as I perform a series of swings. It's amazing how targeted that is on the lateral hip stabilizers. So it's just a load. The area of my study and interest is specifically with older adults. We used to have a lady coming into the practice. She was our most regular visitor. She was 68, she had 2 prosthetic knees, and she completed 192 classes before we closed. She was barely over 5 foot tall, and she could swing a 40 kilo bell. On her 68th birthday, she did a programmed load of 6,800 kilos, and we used to measure her volume load relative to the weight of her car. So I think she had a Toyota Yaris, which is like 1.3 ton, and we'd say, you've done 2 or 3 or 4 Toyotas today. So you can put a huge volume of load through the body through what we'd call a Pragmatic hardstyle training program. So people come in, they just do a whole range of exercises based on or around those deep six. So in terms of loading the body or loading a tissue, let's say it's a shoulder pathology. Somebody's had an unstable shoulder. You can start loading them up in an isometric position with them laying flat on the ground and their arm held overhead, and not move and increase the weight, or get them to slightly rotate their trunk so they start to progress into more of an arm bar, and as they get better at that, progress into resting into an elbow, and that's the start of your Turkish Getup. So you can break the system and the exercises down as much as you want to target a particular outcome, whether it's pain or increasing tissue tolerance or capacity for a particular pathology, or more generally somebody that's elderly that wants to increase their physical capacity, improve their bone health and loading. It's another loading program. So if they don't like running, or they don't have the capacity to go out and do impact-based loading, or they're intimidated by barbells, which was the basis of the Liftmore trial, potentially a kettlebell is another tool. So they could do a goblet squat up and down and into and out of a chair at home if they want, and progress that by either reps or get a heavier kettlebell.
Neil, you're a passionate advocate for what you term this concept of healthcare versus sick care.
Yep.
What would be your advice and top takeaways from your time as a health practitioner, physiotherapist, now research PhD scholar, in terms of the key messages that you think society needs to take note of with regards to this concept?
Oh, that's always been my my driver all the way through exercise science, was this frustration of prevention's better than cure. I'll use my mum as an example. My mum took up doing exercises at home in front of the TV to Jane Fonda VHS tapes when I was very young. She's recently turned 70, and she does 7 days of exercise a week. An hour power walk, 2 hours with friends on a weekend, but in between she's in the gym. So she's doing pump classes and dedicated exercise. She's fit, healthy and active. My wife as a GP will see somebody that's 70 and very different picture. So if you've got sarcopenia or you've got low bone mineral density, you're just not physically very strong, capable, able, you don't move well, at 70, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to turn back the clock. So the behaviours that enable somebody to function like that or that well at 60, 70 in the later years of life, that's a process that starts in there as a child, ideally. You develop behaviours and a passion for being physically active, an interest in health, an interest in movement, and engaged in the behaviours in your younger years that are going to pay dividends later in life. My frustration with healthcare is that it's in response to something happened. So somebody becomes unwell, they have a heart attack, they are diagnosed with diabetes, or they're diagnosed with low bone mineral density. There's a whole catalogue of things that are preventable. The large majority of healthcare conditions could be avoided had that person engaged in different lifestyle behaviours.
And if you could do one thing, just one thing, with your knowledge, influence you have, what would it be? If you could just do one thing to move the dial towards...
Me, physically, or recommend to the individual population as a whole?
Just say if you could...
For the population as a whole, it would be find something that you're passionate about that makes you want to engage in physical activity. I don't think that there's any one physical activity that's necessarily best. You're a runner, I'm not. I hate running. It's the one thing I don't like. But there's something for everybody. And if it involves being physically active, whether it's on your own or in a group, if it's a behaviour that encourages being physically active, is going to be beneficial. So my advice, or the one thing, would be find something that you enjoy, that you love, that you're passionate about, that gets you out of the house, gets you moving and gets you physically healthy.
If you missed last week's episode featuring New Zealand marathon record holder Zane Robertson, it has been one of the most popular featured performer episodes to date. Zane shared very openly around the highs, the lows, and the learnings of his running career since he and his identical twin brother Jake Robertson left New Zealand to learn and live with the East Africans in Kenya and more recently Ethiopia. Here's a little snippet of the amazing story of Zane Robertson.
So one of the darkest days for me was the injury just before Commonwealth Games, because after my medal in Glasgow, I really wanted to back up and even change the colour of that medal to being a gold one. And I'd worked very hard coming back from my sacral stress fracture just over a year ago, and for it to happen again just 3 weeks out from the Games was so devastating and such a kick after all that's happened to me. It crosses your mind, like, is this the point of retirement? Is this the point where your body gives up on you?
To tune into the full episode 170 of the Physical Performance Show, jump over to wherever it is that you source your podcast from and enjoy the full episode. And while there, peruse the archives dating right back to episode 1, featuring surf lifesaving Ironman champion Ali Day. For now, let's jump back on this expert edition with Meigh on all things kettlebell, training for health and performance. Neil, every featured guest of the Physical Performance Show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week.
Yep.
So what is Neil Meigh, Kettlebell Physio's physical challenge going to be?
I would say learn how to do a Turkish Getup well. So I've posted a couple of videos. I can probably give you a link to those to show how it's done, quote unquote, well, or in a particular standard. So learn how to do it would be one. And then balance a shoe on your fist, like we did in the practice. So it's not about weight, it's about doing it with a shoe on your fist. And in the course of a week, aim to do 3 without dropping it with a shoe balanced on your fist. So that would be my challenge.
Brilliant. And we will definitely share a video around that. I was frustrated by it. I had a sore knee that day, so my Turkish Getup ability was limited, but I should get back into it again. Neil, if people want to find out more about your work, obviously your research, you've got the scoping, review submitted, which isn't yet published, but where can listeners find out more about the work you're doing in this field of kettlebell training? The
best place is probably Facebook. So the Kettlebell Physio on Facebook, the logo is pretty distinctive. It's just Kettlebell Physio on Instagram. I don't really use Twitter that much, but Facebook's probably the main port. As soon as the scoping review has come back from peer review, it's going to be open access, but I'll post a link to that on the page. So the intent with that is that it's going to be a resource for people to use. If they've got a question about kettlebells, they'll be able to look at that, and hopefully it will answer their question.
And Neil, that scoping review in particular, the framework through which you set off with your colleagues to spend many hours exploring this was 4 therapists in care, so clinicians, with the concept being prescription of kettlebells for therapeutic purposes, like we've touched on today. And the context being it's got to be evidence-based. It's not social media-based. It's evidence-based, directives. So speaking of that population, I guess, clinicians, what would be the one thing you'd like to encourage clinicians around with regards to kettlebell use?
I had to think about this. I don't know that it's necessarily specifically about kettlebell use, because there are very few answers to that question. If somebody said to me, what are the benefits of using a kettlebell? I'd be really vague, because as they'll read when the scoping review comes out, we don't have a lot of really good quality evidence to support much as far as using the kettlebell goes. That's not to say that it doesn't, but we just don't have any evidence yet. So the more broad recommendation for therapists would be to pay an active interest in what's happening out in the wider community in terms of evidence, and just keeping mindful and interested in what's being published, and having an active interest in keeping up to date. So that would be my...
So it's not directly about the kettlebell, it's more about...
just being keeping up to date, because so much of what happens is outdated practice, things that have been shown to be of limited or no effect, and they're still common. And I think if people had an active interest in the literature and what people were talking about and the conversations that were happening more broadly in the physiotherapy space or their particular area, I think that would be really advantageous to move the profession forward and benefit not only the therapist or the clinician, but the patients or the people that they're looking to serve.
I think it's dangerous. It's challenging for the healthcare consumer who puts a lot of trust in their healthcare providers, but they don't necessarily know if their providers at the forefront of what's around or lagging in the era gone by. Yeah. And there's a lot of trust that's in that relationship. So it's a tricky thing, isn't it? I don't know any simple answer other than, if you're listening and you're working with a healthcare provider, just check them out. Maybe Google what their interests are. Are they visible with an area of interest? And obviously results should speak for themselves. But any advice around how to select a healthcare practitioner?
I think that's almost an impossible question to answer. The onus is very much on us as the individual to keep up to date. Nobody's keeping us accountable. Nobody's checking on us and what we're doing and what we're saying and what we're promoting. And I think people will seek out a healthcare provider predominantly on recommendation. So It's really hard. It's a really, really hard question to answer. People will generally have a good experience from somebody that they trust, somebody that's engaged with them, regardless of all the other things that they may or may not do within the confines of a treatment room. So it's difficult. It's really difficult. And as far as physiotherapy goes, you might be referred to a physiotherapist by a GP. And from that position of the consumer, you don't have the benefit of knowing what we know and knowing what is going on in the broader community. So you can't make that judgment call. You just have to trust that you've made the right decision, or that somebody referring you has referred them based on some good quality evidence that provider's up to date and current and going to do the best thing by you.
Neil, mate, thank you for swinging by and sharing all things on kettlebell resistance training and physiotherapy.
Thanks very much, Brad. It's been really good. It's the first opportunity I've had a chat, and I could go on for hours, so thank you. Really appreciate it.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show featuring Neil Meigh, the Kettlebell Physio. Neil is very easy to find over on social. You'll find Neil on Instagram at Kettlebell Physio, all one word, lowercase. Do let Neil know what it was that you took from today's share-ins, this expert edition, and feel free to send your questions or comments to Neil direct on social media. Don't forget to jump over to the show notes, pogophysio.com.au. There you will see video demonstrations of the hardstyle Big Six: the swing, the clean, the military press, the squat, snatch, get up, and carry. So jump over to the show notes, pogophysio.com.au. Do keep the podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode you're enjoying at any given moment and tagging in the Physical Performance Show at Physical Performance Show. My handle at Brad_Beer over on Instagram and Twitter, and my email address, which I always welcome feedback regarding the show, b.beer@pogophysio.com.au. A massive thanks to those who have been rating and reviewing the show over on iTunes. This week, a massive shout out to your mom, who rated the show 5 stars and commented, "It was always a great podcast, but the most recent episode with Zane Robertson was absolutely amazing and a must listen." Thank you for taking the time to leave that review. Subscribing is the best way to help the show grow, and it also helps you ensure that each and every episode lands in your earbuds each and every week. So if you are yet to hit subscribe to the show, then please do so right now from within your favorite podcast player: iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, the whole gamut. Massive thanks to the good folk who make the show possible each and every week: Daryl Misson, our audio engineer; Susan Wilkin on all things show administration; Matthew Oldin on all things graphic design; and more recently, Oliver Crossley for behind the scenes assistance. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we keep the expert edition theme flowing, and I'll share with you a conversation, a deep dive in fact, into how to optimize your endurance training for optimal performance with leading and acclaimed sports scientist Stephen Seiler. Stephen Seiler is best known for his work on what is now widely known as the Polarized training approach. That is, distributing the intensity of training for endurance sport at approximately a ratio of 80% low intensity and 20% high intensity. We recently had a great conversation around how this applies to all manners of athletes, from the world's best athletes, of which Stephen has worked with many, through to the recreational and beginner athlete. And we've decided to string together a bunch of expert editions. The feedback on these episodes has been wonderful. They have been widely consumed and spoken about. So coming up, beyond Dr. Stephen Seiler on the Polarized training approach, or 80-20 training for endurance athletes, we'll be exploring sports psychology with Dr. Joe Lukens, gut health with Australian-based sports dietitian Chloe McLeod, doing a yoga deep dive with Scott White, and taking a comprehensive look at all things bone stress injuries for the athlete with US-based physical therapist Chris Johnson. So stay tuned for this run of expert editions on the Physical Performance Show. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.